Hi, welcome to I Tried to Eat My Phone. I am Karen Jaworski, and I am joined by my very good friend Kathleen today. And we're going to talk a little bit about work, life balance, and a little bit of how it is to be a female in roles of uh, great magnitude, I would say, which Kathleen has been in. And I appreciate that she has taken on those roles. So, one thing I wanted to get started talking about is there are a lot of, I guess, reports or news coverage of what it's like to be a mom right now during COVID and balancing all of these different things. And how do you feel? Do you notice COVID making a difference, or do you feel like we're still just doing exactly what we always did? Or what's your perception of how this has impacted
Yeah,
your
that's a
life?
great question. And I'm eager to dive into that, Karen. But first, I have to say, I did not know that that was the name of your podcast. My phone. I do know the story there, and that's just
Yes.
perfect. So brilliant.
Okay.
And that's actually, I think, an okay segue to say you are a great example of approaching life with great humor. And
Oh,
it makes
thanks.
such a difference. And I feel like COVID has brought up some really heavy, awful things, right? The suffering that people are enduring is real and it's heartbreaking. And the sacrifices that so many people have to make
Mhm.
are real and they're hard for the kids. And so I would say my first kind of thought was actually from my personal experience. So for the audience, I have a great husband and I have two healthy, wonderful kids. 15, she loves all the time with her mom, and 12. And, we talk often about from a parent's perspective at these ages where they are independent enough to be responsible and, they're the ones who are driving their schoolwork. They're pretty self motivated. I don't have to be on call and attuned to their needs throughout the day the same way that parents do in so many other situations, right? My sister has a 2.5-year-old and a 3.5-year-old and a big job. And that is a recipe for insanity. And then they have help and they're doing a great job navigating through that. So I first want to say that my situation is not at all as challenging as the situations around us and what I observe and the people who I see that inspire me because they're managing with such grace. But even in that where it's easier and there are so many blessings, like I really do love all the time together. I do love that they're, learning to cook and taking turns cooking meals. It also makes me very sad for them that they're not having. So our 15-year-old is a sophomore and she's at a point where in life where you should be able to get more separation and to stretch your independence and to go out with your friends and developmentally those connections with her friends really matter more to her right now than connections with us, and I'm okay with that, but she's not able to realize that, and that's really hard.
Yeah.
And our youngest is more of an introvert, so I think in some ways it's a little less challenging for her. And some days she's like, oh, this is great, I've got my space. But then other times she's like, she said something even just yesterday, she's like, you know what, it turns out I really do miss my friends, like I really do like being with them. And
Yeah.
before we started this official chat, Karen and I were talking about how in the summer it's easier, right? It was safe, we could be outside. So
Mhm.
I think having a good sense of humor can help lighten the load for everyone,
Yeah.
and helping to reframe in the moment. You have a moment of interaction with a kiddo and it can either go dark and snappy really quick and you can both very understandably be on edge, or you can say something that kind of reframes it and be silly and then they laugh at you like, oh mom, and it actually feels a little lighter. So
Yeah.
um that's a little bit of my experience. I don't know, Karen, what would you say? You have two girls.
I think that's really tough. I think, I almost feel like it's kind of magnified what we already have to deal with. And I don't mean to specifically put it towards moms because dads have a huge role too. And I think, it's a tough time to be a parent, but I think it's just, it puts into the pandemic has put into the superlative the things we always were dealing with.
Yeah.
It's just sort of like made that blow up in everyone's faces and be like, yeah, I mean, how are you supposed to do this? Like, you're supposed to do work and you're supposed to do life and you're supposed to cook dinner and you're supposed to take care of kids and you're supposed to take care of everyone else. And then sometimes in our situation, we're in the sandwich generation where there's parents who need help. There's, and so I feel like the pandemic has just put a microscope on like what we've all kind of been managing for a while, which is which is tough. What do you feel like with your work life and your home life? What do you feel like you've instilled when you were talking about the girls kind of dealing with this? Like, do you think there are things that there are takeaways from how you handle things for how they are able to handle things? Like if they look at you and go, oh my gosh, like my mom has done this and this and this and this, so we can handle this better because we've seen that example. Do you feel that at all?
I don't know that they would say, oh, we've seen this. I think there are probably little things that we choose and we do every day that in maybe even subtle ways provides a model for them. Like, for example, we have, and just to clarify my work situation, so I left a really big job. I resigned in February and I finished in June. And so I actually have had, and now I'm involved in a couple different boards. And so I've got work to keep me engaged and help my sanity, which is good. But it's not as overwhelming and demanding as it was. And so that work pressure has eased on me, which has been super helpful, I think, for me to be able to, in practical ways, provide more support for the family and just be more present. And so that's been a blessing. And I recognize that I'm so fortunate to be in that position. And that's not the experience I would have had, most of my career. And I'm so grateful for that. But one of the things we do is we have a fair bit of structure that we've stuck to. So there were times when I traveled a ton for my job, and we prioritized family dinners. So that meant if I wasn't traveling, I was definitely going to be home. We were all going to sit down and have a nice meal together, or a meal together, not always nice. And we still share ups. So the kids, their whole life, really all they've known, and it's kind of just naturally evolved. We sit down and we ask a question, and and again, it's pretty organic. But one of the questions that is going to come up is, what was a bright spot in your day? And it can be as simple as, like, I'll tell you mine from this morning. So I had a 7 a.m. call, and I work with a great guy. I've worked with him for years, and he doesn't have too many things that really get in his craw, but punctuality is a big deal to him. And he almost takes it personally. He feels like it's very disrespectful of other people if you don't come to the meeting on time. And I set a couple alarms last night, and my body clock, I usually wake up somewhere around 6:30, but I set my alarms. And for some reason at 7 o'clock, laying in bed, my husband's alarm went off, and he said, "Kath, it's 7." So my first word out of the day to greet the world was, "Fuck." I don't know if I can explain this, but I'm just being
No, you can. Yeah.
And then I, pop up, and immediately, like, my pits are tingling, and I'm like, oh, I just get that, shot of adrenaline, and I go to the bathroom, and I'm getting ready really quick, and I'm like, I can't believe it. And this is a meeting with, to follow up, it's with a bunch of private equity guys. I don't know everybody really well. I'm really trying to put my best foot forward. And I'm just like kicking myself, like, I cannot believe. And we're going to be on Zoom, but Zoom with zero makeup is not always a good look on me first thing in the morning. And so I'm hurrying and I'm hurrying. And like 7:04, I get a text from him. He's like, oh, the investment committee meeting's going long. Let's push the call to 15 after. Yes, that's never happened. And then a little bit later, we pushed it to 1/2 past, and I'm like, up for the day. And so, so that was great. And so like, that is the type of real up, you know, an up could be for the kids. Sometimes it's like something they ate that was really good. It doesn't have to be a life-changing moment in your
Yeah.
day, but I like the idea that they know that we're going to sit down and eat. They know that like, we're going to come, we're not going to be rushed. We're going to share. And one of the things I've seen from them is, they come with questions or things, or like, I remember this is a few years ago, I asked Harper something about her day. She's like, no, I'm going to share it at dinner. That's my up. Like, she would not answer me because, and I love that she was thinking ahead. And so in the morning, we typically try to ask each other, what's something you're looking forward to in the day? So that you know, you kind of have a sense of what the others in the household are going to be off and what's important to them. And then I really have found, I just love the fact that it's a little bit of practicing gratitude, and the kids both really love that too. And they'll be the ones to call out each other. Wait, mom, we didn't hear your ups. Like, what wasn't up for you? So I don't know, Karen, if it's, I don't know that they are both pretty driven and responsible. I don't know if that's from observing kind of that Pat and I are hard workers, or if it's just like, they're kind of probably more like whatever. But I do think thinking about your day in advance and what other people might be looking forward to in advance and reflecting on it to share is something that's just part of their fabric, the only thing they know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's important for kids to kind of just like, almost by osmosis, sort of just absorb, you know, what's going on around them and what you hold important. You don't have to sit them down and tell them, but they just kind of get it.
Yeah. And I do see them both use humor as an effective coping mechanism, you know, and again, much like you say, like, oh, you know, like Maria today, COVID, either you're shrugging it off or you're just acknowledging it. And I think that's really healthy too.
Yeah.
Like, we get a choice about how you want to approach something. You get to choose your attitude. Yes, it stinks. Yes, it's disappointing about things that are going to come up. So what do you do with that then? You know, and we can all choose how we take that disappointment.
Yeah. Where, I mean, kind of speaking to that a little bit, where do you feel like, I feel like as parents, we have times where we have to take, and in work too, where we have to kind of take liberties and be like, okay, I'm not going to go nuts about this or this or this. Like, to do that work-life balance thing, you kind of have to have moments where you're like, you know what, that's going to be to the aside. This is going to be to the aside, or whether it's kids screen time or something at work, where do you feel like you take liberties to kind of, you know, be like, okay, we're doing our best, but we're still normal people and just trying to make it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, I mean, I feel like this happens all the time where, and I'm trying to think of a specific example for us. I'll come back to that, but let me tell you that this triggered something that, like, Jenna decided, so our 15-year-old plays lacrosse and she's on a club team, and we are a tick more conservative than some of her friends and the other players, which is fine. So she wasn't allowed to go back to this tournament because they flew to a tournament in Delaware and then Pennsylvania. That was last weekend.
Oh, wow.
She handled it well. There were 2 kids whose parents opted not to have them go. And part of it is for Jenna's little blood disorder. We just didn't want to risk that if she got that would trigger. And so she decided on her own on Sunday that she didn't want to go to practice because she said, you know, they haven't quarantined, and I'd be so irritated if I got it and I didn't even get the fun of playing. And I was like, totally your choice. Now you'll be outside. So I don't think the risk is too high. So I'm actually okay if you go. Um, and I think she just didn't want to go. So she didn't
Yeah.
go. And then a little bit later, she was, after it would have been time for us to leave, she's like, Mom, I think I made the wrong choice. And she's like very anxious about it. And I said, look, G, in life, it's so much like I've had to remind myself of this so many times. It's much less about there's one right choice and a wrong choice. The trick is you got to make whatever choice you made the right one, right? Think about
Mhm.
buying a house, taking a trip, getting married, taking a job. It's not, okay, maybe not getting married, but sorry, Pat. But you know, it's so rare that you have to put that pressure on yourself that there's one right answer. It's more about saying, okay, you didn't choose to go to practice. Now, what are you going to do? And so she took a run and she worked on the rebounder. So she's like, okay. And that felt better because then she could say to her coaches, like, I did genuinely, try to work out.
Mhm.
For us, if you were to look at our, let's say our napkins, they are the same napkins we've had probably for 15 years. I
Uh-huh.
think most people would find them disgusting because there's just all the, I should go grab some. They're actually being folded right now. Little, strings all around them. And I fold them all the time. And it honestly doesn't bother me. And my parents drove up to help my sister and we got to visit with them, which was a real bright spot for the summer. And they were a little bit horrified, like, Kathleen, get yourself some new napkins. Like, this is awful. And I was like, yeah, I don't sweat the small stuff. They're right. We are going to get new napkins, but stuff like that doesn't bother me.
Mhm.
Maybe to a fault. Pat's got a much better eye and he's more attentive to the details in our life like that than I am. But I really like tonight's dinner. You hear me talk about how important dinner is. It is. It isn't always good. Harper, it was her turn to make it. We had previously frozen. It was, come in here. She's listening clearly. So
Hi.
demonstrate how a typical
Oh,
night could look.
yes.
So we don't skip that. And dinners,
I
thanks.
love that.
Um,
Thank you, Harper.
yeah, they're not, I mean, I know I am always aspiring to do a better job with healthy foods and healthy meals. I'm sure our sodium intake is too high, but you know what? For some nights when you're going to be busy, like that's okay. I'm happy that we're eating.
Yeah.
Uh, and then, so that kind of stuff, Karen, I just, it's not worth the stress to me. I just like
Yeah.
big picture. If we have mostly healthy meals, good enough.
Yeah, I think it's, you have to have some give and take to do like the back and forth of like, okay, or we're doing family stuff and we're doing uh you know work stuff and we're doing life stuff. Like this
Yeah.
is it's not a time to kind of feel overwhelmed by anything. Like you just, it's, everything is overwhelming these days. So
Yeah.
having
So
those
you're on your
moments
third
where
martini. Like, listen, don't sweat it. Just kidding. But see, Karen, that's
um
a good example of not sweating the small stuff. So
yes.
you should tell the listeners what just happened.
I had to put my power cord in because my computer gets used for things like Among Us and Roblox.
Nice.
So yes, and I sometimes don't know about it until it's like 8% battery. I'm like, okay. One thing I was going to ask you, and I was thinking about this the other day because how many, it was a couple years ago that, no, not that long ago, that you were on the Seattle list of, was it people to watch or?
There was a woman of influence.
Yes.
And then more than a couple of years ago, it was 40 under 40.
Yes.
The woman of
Okay.
influence was probably bigger.
I thought of that the other day. There was something on TV about like how they, were coming up with the list of those people this year. And I was thinking about that and you being on there. How did you feel when someone nominates you, right? And then.
Yeah, I felt so overwhelmed and honored. I mean, I was really touched. I think the year I had that, I think there were maybe 12 of us, maybe 14.
Okay.
And the other women were so accomplished and had done so much. At the time, I was president and general manager for Novell and Attachmate. But it was a really special event. And I had my family, my mom and dad were in town, my cousin Kelly and her two then high schoolers, now college kids were there. And you got to hear the women. Everybody got up and gave a piece of advice, and some were
Mhm.
just hilarious and great speakers, and all of them were inspiring in their own ways. Um, and one of the cool things was afterwards, my sister and my mom hosted an event, and we had some friends get together, and it was multi-generational, which was awesome. It was some good friends from Seattle that are more my mom's age and older, and we all went around and shared a piece of advice with each other. And it was really neat to have just that like sense of support group and
Yeah.
reflection. And then to look around, and Karen, I would put you and Aaron, and we know so many, all of the friends that we have and the people that we know. I feel like sometimes I would never want to, I feel like it's undeserved, because I think there's like you doing these podcasts, you probably get to observe and reflect and hear about people just doing awesome stuff, and you
Yeah.
have a really great perspective to share. So yeah, it was really special to me. It was fun, and I
Mhm.
thought one of the neat things was that it sort of continued on to another experience, and having those meaningful conversations is actually what builds that real support network, and what
Mhm.
helps you feel safe if you needed to go, and it helps you appreciate these amazing people around you. So yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, this kind of leads into another question I had for you, where I was thinking about like how do you feel like you definitely are a leader and a role model in terms of female leadership in a business and in a community. And do you have you kind of ever felt like what moments have you felt like that you either took someone under your wing or kind of like pushed forward someone, a female, and said, okay, you can do this. Like,
Yeah.
how have you kind of impacted somebody else
Yeah.
because of your success?
Great question, Karen. And just for context, so for a little background, as I mentioned, I was a leader in a technology company, Attachmate and Novell. I left that position when our now 15-year-old was diagnosed with a blood disorder. And initially, it wasn't clear what her path to recovery would be like. It wasn't like dire, but I knew I didn't want to travel and I wanted to be there. And her path to recovery was like the best case scenario the whole way through. So that was great. And then I took a little bit of time off, which was interesting, challenging, but good. And then I went back in 2016 and led another software company, Quest. I led a business there. And that's what I just left this year. So I had a good 4 years there. Good experience. And now I'm on the board of a software company, Epicor, and that's been a new position. And I'm very involved in the Ballard Food Bank. And to answer your question, sorry, brevity is really not my strength.
That's okay.
I just want people to have some sense. I actually have mentor type conversations very regularly. So if I think about this past week, I had met with two daughters of someone that I got to know through this board role. Um, I did do a little bit of traveling for board meetings. So I was down in Austin a couple weeks ago. One is out of college, but early in her career, and one is in college. And I have had a few follow-up conversations, and I had one of them. I introduced her to a really awesome woman who was in Quest, and she led out the user experience group. And what she did was, I thought her perspective would be really helpful for this senior in college. And so they had a follow-up conversation. And I followed up for another reason with this same amazing woman, And we were talking about it, and she said, well, Kathleen, you talked to me so many times, and you had sent me that book about Dan Pink, and I had really encouraged her to step up from a leadership perspective. She reported to somebody who led our engineering org, who reported to me. And she said, it's so good. And she's super involved with encouraging women in STEM. And she's like, I love that conversation. Please let her know she can genuinely come back, And there have been, especially when I'm working with women and I see that, you know what, you totally have what it takes. And I'm going to challenge you to be a little more visible, or, you know what, you need to speak, you need to say this in the meeting and not to me after the meeting. And so next time I'm going to really push you. And it's been so rewarding to see people, women especially, just feel a little bit more confident. And one of the topics, this woman's name is Corinne, and she said, one of the things that Corinne and Lainey talked about is this idea of imposter syndrome, this idea of I'm not really good enough, but nobody's figured it out yet. And
yeah.
I can relate to that for sure.
Kind
And
of the fake it till you make it.
exactly, fake
Yeah.
it till you make it. And I think men can too. And Corinne said the difference is when a man feels that way, sorry guys, and this isn't across the board, it can come out as overconfidence to make up for it. It can come out as arrogance. But if a woman feels that way, she will tend to say, I'm not up for the challenge. And observing my own patterns every time, almost without fail, every time I've had an opportunity to like take on a challenge or step up, I freak out. I have a total panic attack, and I will rationalize why it's either not the right time. I've got kids, I can't do this. It's, and it's just been so consistent. And then something happens where, in one example, I realized who was going to go for it. And I was like, oh my God, I really don't want to report to him. I'd rather leave. And I was like, oh, I don't have to interview. I don't want to get a new job. So I might as well go for it. Like literally, that was my rationale. Another time we had this amazing nanny, and I was telling her why I can't go for it. They want me to be the president. I can't be the president. It's global. I'll be gone. She's like, or maybe it'll be really interesting. Maybe it'll be a new challenge. And she just did this like Jedi mind trick. And there's always something else that made me feel like, you know what, I should go for it. And so I want to be that little voice for other people and to remind them that, you know what, it's not forever. If it doesn't work out, that's okay. You change. But I feel like women need to hear that, especially if you're in an industry where there's not a ton of women around. And it reminds me of this Far Side cartoon I saw once. And they had a woman who was perfectly normal and healthy looking in a mirror. And she saw an image that was like not as attractive, right? It was bigger and it just wasn't as attractive. And they show this scrawny little guy, and he's looking in the mirror and he sees this like big buff guy. And I was like, isn't that the sad truth? Anyway, so to answer your question, Karen, yeah, I make an attempt to be an active resource for the women I've met along the way. I went to an organization a number of years ago, Vital Voices, and I was kind of an official mentor. But one of the things that I think women need to understand is when you have that relationship, you also have the onus to do the follow-up, and you can't expect someone to be reaching out to you. Like, it is so rewarding. It is so what I love to do. And I tell people that, but please, you have the next action, because then I'll just feel like this, kind of creepy weirdo that let's have another meaningful conversation, right? And I'm not going to do that, but I'm very much available to continue those dialogues.
I think one thing that I am always impressed by with you is your ability to, one of my favorite qualities in people is humility, and having the sense to know, like, you know what, I might not be doing the best job, but I'm going to give it my all. Like, I probably have fallen before, and it's okay. And so I think that's a good leadership role to take, because teaching people, like, it's okay to like have moments where you're unsure of yourself, or but here's what you take away from it, like, or here's how you amend that. And that's a big thing. can you think of a time in your career where you have sort of like not failed, but kind of tripped? And how did you recover from that? Like a time where you felt like, oh crap, that didn't go well.
Yeah, well, so plenty of times, Karen. And I think you can say humility. You can also say that I'm just more honest than most.
Okay.
So
Well, they kind of go hand in hand a little bit.
exactly.
Yeah.
I've been a part of, in fact, one meeting. It was, I'll leave out the name, but it was bound to be an intense meeting, and it did not go well, and we got escorted out. It's my only time in my career. And yeah, and what I didn't know then is that that was going to be part of the play that they had, and it ended up resulting in a huge deal. But so we go out in this whole dramatic thing, and the rep was with me, and a couple other people were with me, and it's raining where we are, and it's like, oh God, that was not ideal. And then he's like, and he was an Indian guy, really nice guy. And he's like, oh, Kati, I left the keys in the room. And so then we have this dramatic exit. And then we have to go back in there and kind of like, he goes in, he's like, oh, you know what? You just kicked us out of, yeah, I got to go back in and get the keys. So he gets the keys. And then I was just like, and I think when that happens, you just have to say, and that might not be the best example of a mistake. And I'll give you one, it's a true story. And you just have to say, okay, that happened. And now what? Right? And what are we going to do to deal with it? And
Right.
How do we take that bad situation and where do we go from here? And that's really the key question. When I look back, mistakes that I made where I should have let people go before I did, because I just kept thinking like, come on, you can do it. And it was really, in hindsight, either I wasn't clear enough about what the role needed, or I wasn't clear enough. And there should never be a surprise, right? That's something that I've learned and I've struggled with over kind of recognizing when a change needed to be made sooner. So some of that, and I think, just the mindset of tell the truth always, right? You always have to have integrity, even when that means like, yeah, own it. Like, I screwed up. And I would rather, I think part of leadership means, even if it wasn't your mistake, you always own the end result. Like, if something goes wrong, it is on you, period. And if something goes right, credit to the team. And that's the only way to really motivate people too, right? Otherwise you're just obnoxious jerk.
I always think about that. I don't know if you remember when we were psychology majors, like the whole idea of, and maybe I think I've talked about this with you before, that whole idea of external locus of control and internal locus of control. Like, I was fascinated by like how that propels people. Like, I'm very internal locus of control. Like, it's always my fault. Like, I feel terrible. Like, somebody like slips on ice and I'm like, oh gosh, should I have helped them? Like, and then external locus of control, kind of having that like, well, it's everyone else's fault. Like, I didn't pass the test because the test was not ordered correctly or whatever. And so I'm always kind of fascinated by that. But I think good leadership takes some internal locus of control to say, okay, it may not be all me, but I'll own it and I'll help try and fix it. I mean, that's a huge piece of leadership.
Yeah. And I think even in communicating with your family, like to say, you know what, I must not have communicated clearly about this. To kind of say like, and so, because sometimes that's what it is like, for whatever reason, they didn't hear quite right, or you thought you were more clear. And when it comes to motivation, Karen, there's a guy, I mentioned him earlier, Daniel Pink, and he talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And that has really resonated to me as I observe myself and others. Like, autonomy, like, I want to do it. I want to feel like you're not holding them, you're not telling me every little step. Like, let me figure it out. Let me fail, right? Let me try. Mastery, like the idea of actually getting better at something feels really good. It's a little bit like a growth mindset. Like, that actually feels good to improve and to get really good at something. And then purpose. And that's the thing that I think where you can really make a big difference. Like, what is the point, and how does what I'm doing make an impact, and how does that connect to something bigger that even if you're in business, I can feel good about and be proud of.
Yeah.
And so that's been really impactful.
Yeah. I love that. But I think that's a great philosophy to take into a lot of different areas of life and stuff. And I, I think one other thing that I really always appreciate about you is, with the work-life balance, like you have always been very honest about like, okay, I'm too much in this area. I'm not enough in this area. This area is covered now, but I feel like this area is flailing. So that's really tough. I mean, I do you feel like you're in a place now where you're kind of finding that balance, or have you always felt like you've been able to find that balance?
No, in terms of finding the
Yeah.
balance.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that what helps me is, so it's really, and you've gone through this, Karen, right, with the different iterations of the role that work played in your life. I think both times when I left Attachmate, it was under the context of such clarity of purpose and stress with Jenna that felt, um, there was no concept of balance. I knew 100% I was doing what I needed to do, and I had a clear focus. But when that was kind of life back to normal, then I was like, oh, what? And then I went through elation for a while, like, oh, this is great. We had the best summer ever, 2015. Like, this is wonderful. And then I was kind of like, the kids were back in school. It's like, what do I do with myself? And I definitely felt like I didn't have enough going on. I didn't, in the ways that I wanted. I didn't feel like I was growing. I didn't feel like I was challenged. And I actually felt kind of guilty about that. I'm like, God, I have time with my beautiful family, and this still isn't enough. And of course, then there's dynamics with, like, you know, Pat, who's this amazing, super supportive husband. And I think he and I probably have different amounts of needs for different things in our life. So he has taken a bigger role in managing the home and the kiddos, for a lot of the different, especially when I had jobs that required travel, and enjoyed that. And eventually I found, kind of, I did some independent consulting, and then the Quest opportunity came. And then that was jumping into something big. It ended up being a little more travel than I think I thought I was committing to. But once I kind of got in there, for a lot of that, that felt like I hit the right balance for a while. But then the business demands on some things that we wanted to do organizationally as a company fired up, the travel fired up. And I was like, this is way too much. I am way over toggled here. And I felt like I'm going to regret this. I'm going to look back and feel like I missed it. And that caused me a lot of angst. And then kind of history repeats itself. Then I had a little bit more time for a landing because of COVID. So I resigned. They said, will you stay? We were having the CEO change. Yes, I stayed. Then they said, will you stay again while we try to find someone for your business unit? I said, yes. So I had a lot of time where we weren't traveling, right? From February to June.
Yeah.
And then it was kind of the same thing, like, okay, this is great. The good thing is, by then I'd been engaged with the food bank for 5 years. And then when I started this board role, and I'll be taking some classes, that's given me enough to kind of feel like I've got some meaty things going on. And I'm okay as long as I have enough that I can say I'm still growing and learning and contributing, that it doesn't have to be, I'm not done forever, but it doesn't have to be my biggest thing right now. And I'm trying just to remind myself that everything is finite. And Karen, I'll be crying to you and talking in 2 years when Jenna's in college, like, oh, I don't want to wish these days away. Like, I'm really happy to be more present. And I recognize that the trade-off there will always be trade-offs. Part of the trade-off is that sometimes I'm going to feel like I wish I had a little more going on. And that just might be how it is for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really tough. I mean, I'm of a similar suit in terms of like, all right, what's next? What's next? What do I do now? What do I do now? And I think if anything that the pandemic has done, and maybe a little smidge of cancer has accomplished for me, is going, wait a minute, what are you getting out of life today? Like,
Yeah.
but it also kind of revs it up where you're like, all right, what am I doing today? I
Yeah.
got today. Like, what are we gonna do today? Like, how are we gonna change the world today?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a tough balance to it's a tightrope.
It is for sure.
It's
And I think
really,
you exploring your creative side and connecting in something like this, I'm going to be doing some different things just for myself for Thanksgiving, right? We took this awesome diversity, equity, and inclusion training through the food bank.
oh,
One of the
cool.
exercises was to write out 10 people who you would go to for support. And the woman used an example, like, let's say you had a question with the board food bank, like, who would you go to? And then, so you kind of write that out. And she's like, now take away any family members. She's like, okay, so I got to scratch some people off. I get to 10. And then the point of that exercise was then to say, now look at their ethnicity, look at their education level, look at, are they immigrant or refugee? And then choose a category, religion or whatever you want to choose. And part of the point of that was to become aware of the diversity or the lack of diversity. And I've really thought about this because I think another benefit to that, and then we talked about how do you create a more diverse network and lots of really valuable things. But another benefit of that I've asked myself is, gosh, do these people know that? Do they know that that's the role that they would play for me? And have I expressed my appreciation for that? And so, one of my challenges to myself is to make sure I have those conversations and I send those notes. And taking time to connect in meaningful ways is time well spent, right? And so if you actually have a little bit more time to do that, I'm trying to figure out what are those other meaningful things that I can look back on however long this period is and say, wow, this is awesome. If I hadn't done this, taken this time and tried to be intentional about it, I may not have had this conversation or I may not have expressed that.
Yeah.
And, other times, Karen, I think about getting to be with you in the context of still having the job, still having the family, and that felt meaningful. And getting to be with other people at times that felt like it mattered, and that's what it's kind of all about,
Yeah. Yeah, because that's such a huge, I mean, it's our whole purpose is like, everyone else, and what are we doing to better the world? What are we doing to help our kids and support our spouses and support our families? And at times it can seem overwhelming, but the reward system there is huge, I think, in general, which we're fortunate enough that it is a reward to kind of have that outreach, to be able to do that. So, well, thanks, Kathleen. I have absolutely loved hearing your thoughts on this. As always, I love hearing your thoughts on everything.
Karen, it's
so
always great to talk to you.
Yeah.
So fun.
Thank you. This has been super, super fun. And I'm always excited to see what you're doing next.
Oh, thank you. And I am always honored to have you as a friend and that you consider me a friend too.
Thanks.
All right. Love you so much.